We had to keep it a secret. She can never know the truth. Sloane Rossi jolted awake at 3:07 a.m., her throat parched and her bladder full. The digital clock on the nightstand cast a faint red glow in the cavernous guest room of the Blackwood estate. The silence of the New York Hudson Valley was not peaceful. It was a heavy, expensive blanket, smothering and absolute. Just hours before, the evening had felt like a dream, the kind of fairy tale she'd stopped believing in as a child. But Sloane should have known that in her life, dreams and nightmares were often the same thing, wearing different masks. She had navigated her 10-year-old Toyota Corolla up the serpentine driveway, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The Blackwood Manor wasn't a house. It was a fortress of old money and privilege, all soaring granite and leaded glass windows that winked coldly in the twilight. The landscaping alone, she thought, with a social worker's practicality, probably cost more than her annual salary from the Philadelphia Department of Human Services. Lucas was waiting for her at the towering oak door, his smile a beacon of warmth that momentarily chased away her unease. He was her anchor, the man who had pulled her from a life of quiet desperation. At 29, Sloane had spent most of her years feeling like a ghost, drifting through a series of foster homes in West Philadelphia until she aged out of a system that had long since forgotten her name. Lucas Blackwood, with his easy confidence and promises of a future, made her feel solid, real. When he'd proposed after a year, she'd said yes through joyful tears, believing their love could span the vast, invisible canyon between their worlds. "They're going to love you," he'd whispered, kissing her forehead as she stepped inside the marbled foyer. "Just be yourself." The dinner that followed was a masterclass in subtle brutality. The Blackwood family sat at a table long enough to host a bowling alley, the five of them adrift in a sea of polished mahogany. Eleanor Blackwood, Lucas's mother, was a woman who could fillet a person's soul with a single, silent glance. Her questions to Sloane were surgical strikes disguised as polite conversation. "And your parents, Sloane? What did they do?" Eleanor asked, her voice like the chime of fine crystal. "I didn't really know them," Sloane replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I was raised in foster care in Philadelphia." Eleanor's lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. "I see." The two words were a verdict. Isabel, Lucas's sister, was less refined in her cruelty. "I just adore your dress," she'd said, her eyes sweeping over Sloane's simple, off-the-rack cocktail dress. "It's so authentically vintage." The condescension was a physical weight. She then launched into a story about her gap year in Milan, not bothering to see if Sloane had ever left the country. Each comment, each exchanged glance between mother and daughter, was a tiny, precise incision. Sloane felt herself bleeding internally, a slow trickle of shame and anger. Arthur Blackwood, the patriarch and CEO of Blackwood Biotech, was the only one who offered a semblance of warmth, though it was distant, formal. He asked about her work with at-risk youth in Philadelphia with what seemed like genuine interest, his brow furrowing as she described the bureaucratic labyrinths and heartbreaks. "It's commendable work, Sloane. Truly," he said, and for a fleeting second Sloane thought she saw a shadow cross his face, something that looked like guilt. But it was gone so quickly she dismissed it as a trick of the candlelight. Lucas, her champion, her fiancé, spent the meal squeezing her hand under the table, his smile a strained, apologetic grimace. He never challenged them, never defended her. He merely deflected, steering the conversation toward wedding plans or the unseasonably warm autumn. The disappointment that curdled in Sloane's stomach was bitter, but she swallowed it. This was just one night. Once they were married, once they had their own life, things would be different. Eleanor had insisted on separate rooms. Tradition. "Dear," she'd said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. So Sloane found herself in a guest suite that was more museum than bedroom. The silk sheets were cold and slippery, the air smelling of lemon polish and old money. She fell into a fitful sleep, haunted by fragmented dreams of a woman, with a soft voice and kind eyes, the ghost of a mother she could barely remember. It was her full bladder that finally dragged her from the unsettling dreams at 3 a.m. The mansion was a tomb, dark and silent. She padded barefoot down the hall, the intricate Persian runner soft beneath her feet. As she passed the grand staircase, she heard it, the low, tense murmur of male voices from the first floor. Her heart stuttered. No one had any good reason to be having a hushed conversation at this hour. Driven by an instinct she couldn't name, Sloane crept down the stairs, her breath held. The voices grew clearer, emanating from Arthur's study at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of golden light cutting through the darkness. She pressed herself against the wall, her pulse hammering in her ears, and peered through the crack. Arthur Blackwood sat behind his massive desk, but he wasn't reviewing contracts. He was counting stacks of $100 bills, his movements practiced, efficient. Lucas stood beside him, his face ashen in the lamplight, watching the process with a grim, silent intensity. But it wasn't the money that made the air freeze in Sloane's lungs. It was the photograph on the desk, positioned so Arthur could see it as he worked. It was a picture of a young woman, her skin the same rich cocoa as Sloane's, her smile brilliant and hopeful. She couldn't have been older than 25, wearing a white lab coat and holding a rolled-up certificate. She had Sloane's eyes, her same high cheekbones, the same distinct widow's peak Sloane had always been teased about. Next to the photograph was a beige file folder. Sloane's vision sharpened, zeroing in on the label. Philadelphia Child Welfare System. Case files, 1998-2013. The exact years she had been in the system. A small, choked sound escaped her lips. It was enough. Both men's heads snapped toward the door. Time stopped. In that frozen sliver of a second, their eyes met. Sloane's wide with horrified comprehension. Arthur's filled with panic. Lucas's swimming in shame. Then, Sloane's body moved before her mind could catch up. She pushed the door open, her legs feeling like wood. "Who is she?" Her voice was a ragged whisper. She pointed a trembling finger at the photograph. "Who is that woman?" Arthur's face went slack. Lucas opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The silence was thick, suffocating. It was broken by the sharp click of heels on marble. "Well," Eleanor Blackwood's voice sliced through the tension. "It seems the charade is over sooner than we'd planned." She glided into the room, wrapped in a velvet robe, her blonde hair impeccably styled despite the hour. Her gaze swept over Sloane, not with pity, but with cold assessment. Isabel appeared behind her, a smirk playing on her lips. "Sit down, Sloane," Eleanor commanded, gesturing to a leather armchair. "It's time we had a talk." But Sloane was rooted to the spot, her gaze darting from the photograph to Lucas's guilty face to the stacks of cash. "Tell me," she demanded, finding a sliver of strength. "Tell me right now." Arthur cleared his throat, the sound rough. "Her name was Lena Moreau. She was your mother." "I know who my mother was," Sloane shot back, though the truth was a hollow ache. Lena Moreau had died of an overdose when Sloane was 6, leaving behind only a void and a handful of fuzzy memories. "What I want to know is why you have her picture. Why you have files on me." Eleanor settled into the chair behind the desk as if it were a throne. "Your mother worked for Blackwood Biotech 29 years ago. She was a bright lab assistant, though rather ambitious. She developed unfounded concerns about one of our drug trials, a medication for postpartum depression. She threatened to take her baseless fears public." "They weren't unfounded," Arthur murmured, almost to himself. Eleanor silenced him with a glare. "We protected our company, our employees, our shareholders," she continued, her voice hardening. "We terminated her employment and ensured she would not be a further liability to the industry. We did what was necessary." The room tilted. Sloane gripped the doorframe for support. "You destroyed her. You ruined her career because she tried to do the right thing. We protected our family," Isabel chimed in. Lena was unstable. Everyone knew it. What happened afterward wasn't our problem. The pieces, ugly and sharp, clicked into place in Sloane's mind. She couldn't get another job. She fell apart. She overdosed. Because of you. And I ended up in foster care. Her voice broke on the last words. "We offered a generous severance," Eleanor said dismissively. "Her choices after that were her own. We are not a charity." Sloane turned to Lucas, her heart shattering as she searched the face of the man she loved. You knew all of this." He finally met her eyes, his filled with a desperate misery. "Not at first, Sloane, I swear. When I met you at that charity gala, it was real. But then, my mother had you vetted. It's standard for anyone who gets close to the family. When we found out who your mother was, she asked me to keep seeing you." "Asked you?" Sloane's voice rose, sharp with disbelief. "She asked you to seduce me? To lie to me?" "It wasn't like that," Lucas pleaded. At first maybe, but I fell in love with you, I did. But then you started asking questions, talking about trying to find out more about your mother's life. We had to keep you close. We had to make sure you didn't dig up the past. The engagement? Sloan felt the words like a physical blow. The prenup? The NDA? It was to protect the family, Eleanor stated coldly, as if discussing a corporate merger. She opened a desk drawer and pulled out a sleek leather portfolio. Here's what will happen. We are going to give you $1.5 million. You will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Then you will leave New York and never contact my son or our family again. You will disappear quietly, just as your mother should have done. Sloan stared at the portfolio, at the check she could see through the clear window, already filled out with her name. A fortune. A life free of student debt, of financial worry. All she had to do was sign away her mother's memory, her own truth. Who would believe you if you refused? Isabel added with a sneer. A foster kid from Philly against the Blackwoods. We own judges, politicians. We'll bury you. You'll be labeled as troubled and delusional, just like Lena. Sloane's eyes found Arthur's. He was the only one who couldn't hold her gaze. The drug was dangerous, wasn't it? She asked, her voice suddenly calm. My mother was right. Arthur closed his eyes, a wave of pain washing over his face. The medication. It increased the risk of severe, sometimes fatal cardiovascular events in a small subset of patients. By the time the data was undeniable, pulling it would have meant admitting guilt, bankruptcy, ruin, so we buried it. I'm not proud of it, but I had a company to save. Your mother was going to destroy everything over a small statistical anomaly. A small percentage, Sloan repeated numbly. You're talking about people's lives, mothers. I am sorry about Lena, Arthur said, and he sounded like he meant it. Truly, but this is business. Take the money, Miss Rossi. Move on. It's what she would have wanted for you. In that moment, something fundamental solidified inside Sloan. A lifetime of powerlessness, of accepting scraps, of being grateful for any small kindness, crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. She looked at these people, surrounded by their wealth and their absolute certainty of their own superiority, and she knew she had a choice. She could take their blood money and let them win, or she could fight. She stepped forward, her movements deliberate. She picked up the photograph of Lena Moreau, clutching the cool frame to her chest. Then she turned for the last time to Lucas, the man who had traded her heart for his family's approval. You don't get to buy your way out of murder, she said, her voice low and steady. She yanked the diamond engagement ring from her finger and threw it at him. It struck his chest with a dull tap and clattered to the floor, rolling beneath his father's desk. Security, Eleanor barked into an intercom. We have an intruder in the study. Remove her. 2 large security guards materialized within moments. They escorted a numb Sloan to her room, watched as she shoved her few belongings into her overnight bag, and then marched her to her car as the first hints of dawn tinged the sky over the Hudson Valley. She drove away from the Blackwood estate with nothing but her phone, her bag, and the stolen photograph of her mother. The road back to Philadelphia was a blur of tears and a burning, incandescent rage. By the time she pulled up to her cramped apartment, the tears had dried, replaced by a single, clear purpose. She picked up her phone and called the only person she trusted, Marcus Thorne, a grizzled, retired investigative reporter who now volunteered as a legal advocate at her agency. She told him everything. Marcus listened, the silence on his end profound. When she finished, he said, Sloan, if you want to do this, you need to understand. They will throw everything they have at you. It will be a war. My mother tried to tell the truth and they killed her, Sloan said, her voice unwavering. I'm not going to let them get away with it. And I'm not going to let them break me. On the other end of the line, she could almost hear Marcus's grim smile. All right then, kid. Let's start digging. The days that followed her return to Philadelphia were a blur of grim determination. Sloan's small apartment, once a cozy sanctuary, now felt like a command center for a war she never asked for. The photograph of Lena Moreau was propped on her kitchen table, a constant, silent reminder of what was at stake. Marcus Thorne arrived on her doorstep the next morning, bearing 2 large coffees and a cardboard box filled with notebooks and a battered laptop. He was a man in his late 60s, with a face like a weathered roadmap and eyes that had seen too much but had never lost their fire. Okay, Rossi, he said, setting the coffee on the table and nodding at the photograph. That's your North Star. Now we need a map. Start from the beginning. Everything you remember about your mother. Sloane closed her eyes, trying to push past the fog of childhood memory. It's all fragments. The smell of her perfume, like jasmine and vanilla. She sang to me in French sometimes. She was always tired, but she'd always read to me before bed. Her voice hitched. And there was a woman. An older woman who lived down the hall in our apartment building. Mrs. Chen. She was from Hong Kong, I think. She used to watch me when my mother worked late. She'd give me these little almond cookies. Marcus was already typing on his laptop. Chen, common name, but it's a start. What else? Did your mother ever talk about work? Bring anything home? Sloane strained, the effort causing a headache to bloom behind her eyes. She had a briefcase. A brown leather one scuffed at the corners.
I remember because I used to draw on it with crayons and she'd get so mad. She paused, a sudden vivid image flashing in her mind.
There was a day she came home and she was crying. Not loud sobs, just quiet. She was sitting at our kitchen table and she had a key. A small silver key. She was staring at it like it was a snake. She told me that sometimes the truth was a heavy thing to carry, but you had to carry it anyway. A key. Marcus repeated, his fingers flying across the keyboard. To a locker? A storage unit? Did she have a safe deposit box? I don't know. We didn't have money for a bank box. Sloane's shoulders slumped. It was so long ago, Marcus. What if there's nothing left to find? The Blackwoods were scared enough to try and buy your silence for 7 figures, Marcus said without looking up. That means there's something to find. People like them don't get scared over ghosts. They spent the next week digging. Marcus used his old journalistic contacts to pull what little public record existed on Lena Moreau. Her employment at Blackwood Biotech was confirmed. Listed as a research assistant 2 from 1994 to 1996. Her termination was noted as a reduction in force, a common corporate euphemism. Sloane, meanwhile, scoured her own past. She called the Philadelphia Child Welfare Agency, but her own records were sparse, offering no clues about her mother's life. It was like Lena had been systematically erased. The breakthrough came from Marcus, tracking down property records. I found a Gladys Chen, he announced one evening, his voice crackling with excitement over the phone. She's 76, living in an assisted living facility in Northeast Philly. The timeline fits. She lived at the same address you did until 1998. Sloane's heart hammered against her ribs. Will she see me? I called and told her you were Lena Moreau's daughter, Marcus said. There was a long silence, and then she said, It's about time. Get your coat, kid. We're going. The Silver Pine Senior Living was a clean, well-kept, but undeniably institutional building. The air smelled of antiseptic and overcooked vegetables. Gladys Chen was waiting for them in a common area, a tiny, bird-like woman with sharp, intelligent eyes behind thick glasses. She sat in a wingback chair, a knitted blanket over her legs. When Sloane approached, holding out the photograph, Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. She took the frame in her delicate, age-spotted hands. Lena, she whispered, her voice raspy. You have her smile. And her fire, I think. I wondered if you would ever come. She looked from Sloane to Marcus. They broke her, you know. Those people. She was so bright, so full of ideas. Then she found the bad numbers, the lies. She tried to tell them to do the right thing. And they smashed her like a bug. Sloane knelt before the old woman, her own eyes stinging. Mrs. Chen, do you know what happened to her things? Her papers? She mentioned a key. A slow, knowing nod. She was afraid. The last month she was so afraid. She said they were watching her. She gave me a key, told me it was for a storage locker, rented in my name because she was scared they were monitoring her. She said, Gladys, if something happens to me, you keep paying the rent. Someone will come for the truth one day. Mrs. Chen reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small, tarnished silver key attached to a green rubber fob with a unit number stamped on it. I have been paying the rent for 27 years. From my pension, waiting for you. Sloane took the key. It was cold and heavy in her palm, a tiny piece of metal that felt like it held the weight of a life. Where is it? The store all on Adams Avenue, Mrs. Chen said. Unit B17, go. See what your mother left for you. The store-all facility was a bleak, utilitarian place, a maze of identical orange garage doors under the flickering glow of fluorescent lights. Sloane's hands were shaking so badly she could barely fit the key into the lock of Unit B17. Marcus stood behind her, a solid, reassuring presence. The lock clicked. With a grunt, Sloane hauled the rolling door up. It screeched in protest, revealing a small, dark space that smelled of dust and old paper. A single banker's box sat in the center of the concrete floor. That was all. Sloane's breath caught. For a moment, she was afraid to step inside, afraid that the contents wouldn't live up to a lifetime of wondering, to the immense sacrifice Mrs. Chen had made. Marcus reached past her and flipped a switch just inside the door. A single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered on, casting a weak yellow light over the box. Sloane stepped in and lifted the lid. It wasn't just papers. It was a life's work, meticulously organized. On top was a sealed, yellowed envelope with her name on it, written in her mother's elegant cursive. Beneath it were lab notebooks, their pages filled with dense, scientific handwriting, charts, and graphs. There were printed emails with headers from Blackwood Biotech servers. There were internal memos, photocopies of altered data sheets, and handwritten notes on legal pads detailing conversations, names, dates. Tucked in a side compartment were 3 old USB drives in a small Ziploc bag. Sloane sank to her knees on the cold concrete, the letter in her hands. She broke the brittle seal with a trembling finger. My dearest Sloane, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are no longer a little girl. I am so sorry I could not be there to watch you grow. Please know, from the very depths of my soul, that I loved you more than life itself. You were my greatest joy. I am also sorry to leave you with this burden. But the truth matters. I discovered that Blackwood Biotech's flagship drug, Solevera, which is prescribed to thousands of new mothers for postpartum depression, causes a drastic increase in the risk of pulmonary hypertension and thromboembolism. The data from our Phase 3 trials was clear and damning, but the company, led by Arthur Blackwood, chose to hide it. They falsified reports to the FDA, they intimidated researchers, and they buried the adverse outcomes. They are putting profits over lives. I tried to report it internally, but I was threatened. I tried to go to the authorities, but I was discredited. They are calling me unstable, a liar. I have gathered everything I can here. It is all the proof. I'm so afraid, my darling. But I am more afraid of the mothers who might die if I stay silent. Be brave, my Sloane. Be braver than I was. Your strength was always in you, even when you were small. I see it in your eyes. Do what is right, not what is easy. All my love, forever, Mom, Sloane wept. She wept for the mother who had been so courageous, so alone. She wept for the little girl who had lost everything. She wept with the crushing weight of the responsibility that had just been passed to her. She wasn't holding a box of evidence. She was holding her mother's heart, her last, desperate act of love. Marcus gave her a moment, then gently took the letter. He read it, his jaw tightening. He picked up one of the lab notebooks, flipping through the pages. He scanned the printed emails, one of which was from Arthur Blackwood to the head of regulatory affairs that read, "The Monroe data is a statistical outlier. Rerun the analysis until it conforms. I don't care how you do it." My God, Marcus breathed. It's all here. It's a smoking gun the size of Delaware. Sloane looked up from the concrete floor, her tears leaving clean tracks through the dust on her face. The grief was still there, a raw, open wound. But beneath it now was a foundation of ironclad resolve. They didn't just destroy her career, Sloane said, her voice hoarse but steady. They murdered her character. They let the world think she was a crazy, incompetent addict. They let me think it. She picked up a USB drive, clutching it in her fist. They have to answer for this. But as they began to carefully pack the box into the trunk of Marcus's car, a cold, pragmatic thought began to form in Sloane's mind, cutting through the white-hot fury. She had the power to destroy Blackwood Biotech. She could release this information to the press and watch the company burn. But what then? She thought of the thousands of people who worked for Blackwood, the janitors, the receptionists, the factory workers, the junior scientists who had no idea about the corruption at the top. They would lose their jobs, their pensions, their health care. Their families would suffer. The chaos would be immense. The Blackwoods would use that chaos. They would paint her as a vengeful orphan out to destroy a great American company and put thousands on the street. They would use their influence to twist the narrative, just as Isabel had threatened. Destruction was tempting. It felt like justice. But as she looked at the box containing her mother's life's work, she remembered Lena's words. Do what is right, not what is easy. Marcus, she said as he closed the trunk. I don't want to burn it all down. He looked at her, surprised. No, after what they did? My mother wasn't trying to destroy. She was trying to save lives. If I just blow the company up, I'm causing more pain. That's not justice. That's just more of their kind of poison. She took a deep breath, the chilly night air clearing her head. I want to use this. I want to force a change. I want the people responsible to go to prison. I want the victims to be compensated, and I want the company to be saved from itself, to be forced to become what it always should have been. Marcus studied her for a long moment, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. You're not just your mother's daughter, kid. You're your own woman. That's a hell of a plan. It's also a hell of a lot harder than a simple explosion. I know, Sloane said, looking back at the storage unit, now just an empty dark square. But it's the right thing to do. She had the truth. Now she needed a strategy. The following weeks were a whirlwind of clandestine strategy. Sloane and Marcus transformed her small apartment into a nerve center. The single box from the storage unit yielded a mountain of evidence. Lena's notes were not just accusations. They were a meticulously documented roadmap of corporate fraud. She had recorded dates, times, names, and verbatim conversations. The USB drives contained audio files of meetings where Arthur Blackwood explicitly ordered data to be recalculated and smoothed out. Marcus, using his old contacts, set up a secure, anonymous channel to the Department of Justice and the FDA. They didn't go public immediately. Instead, they began a controlled, tactical leak to a trusted federal prosecutor, a woman named Anna Flores, who had a reputation for being untouchable and relentless. Simultaneously, Sloane knew she needed public pressure to counter the Blackwoods' influence. She carefully selected a journalist, Ben Carter, from a major metropolitan newspaper, known for his dogged investigative work and integrity. She provided him with just enough to run a story that would force the government's hand without jeopardizing the ongoing federal investigation. The article broke on a Tuesday morning. The headline was stark. Blackwood Biotech accused of concealing fatal drug risks. Whistleblower's legacy revealed. It featured a grainy but powerful picture of Lena Moreau from her lab ID and detailed her fight, her termination, and her tragic death. It stopped short of accusing the family of direct involvement in her death, but the implication hung heavy in the air. The fallout was immediate. Blackwood Biotech's stock plummeted. News vans surrounded their corporate headquarters. The board of directors, most of whom had been handpicked by Arthur, went into panic mode. Inside the Blackwood estate, the facade of unity crumbled. Arthur, facing the collapse of his life's work and potential criminal charges, turned on Eleanor. "This is your fault," he roared, his voice echoing through the cavernous study. "Your paranoia, your need to control everything. If you hadn't pushed Lucas to manipulate that girl, she would have never gone digging." Eleanor remained icily composed, but a crack had appeared in her armor. "We protected the family, Arthur. We did what was necessary. She is just a foster child. We will weather this," but Lucas was broken. He had seen the photograph of Lena Moreau in the newspaper, her hopeful eyes a stark contrast to the monster his family had painted her as. He'd read Sloane's account of their betrayal, anonymously sourced in the article, but unmistakably hers. The guilt was a physical weight crushing him. He refused to leave his room, ignoring his mother's demands that he show some backbone. Isabel, meanwhile, fled. She took a private jet to their family villa in Switzerland, a move that was instantly pounced upon by the media as an admission of guilt. The federal investigation, fueled by the public outcry and the irrefutable evidence Sloane had provided, moved with stunning speed. Subpoenas were issued. Grand juries were convened. It was Anna Flores who proposed the deal to Arthur Blackwood. Faced with evidence that could put him in prison for the rest of his life, he was offered a choice: testify against Eleanor, the mastermind of the cover-up and the campaign against Lena and Sloane, in exchange for a reduced sentence. The patriarch, seeing his empire in ruins and his family shattered, made the calculated, self-preserving choice. He turned state's evidence. Lucas was arrested quietly one evening, charged with conspiracy, wire fraud, and being an accomplice after the fact for his role in the scheme to silence Sloane. The image of him in handcuffs being led from the family estate was on every news channel. The trial that followed was a media circus. Sloane was the star witness. She sat in the stand, her back straight, and recounted everything: the dinner, the discovery in the study, the bribe, the threats. She held up her mother's lab notes for the court to see. She played the audio recordings. She was calm, measured, and devastatingly credible. When the defense attorney, a slick, expensive lawyer hired by Eleanor, tried to attack her character, implying she was a gold digger motivated by revenge, Sloane didn't flinch. "Is it true, Miss Rossi, that you were angry that the engagement was broken off? That this is all about a jilted lover's revenge?" Sloane looked directly at the jury, then back at the lawyer. "This was never about a broken engagement. It was about a broken life, my mother's. This is about the truth she never got to tell. I'm just the one who finally got to speak it for her." The jury believed her. Eleanor Blackwood was found guilty on multiple counts of corporate manslaughter, fraud, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. She was sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Her cold elegance finally stripped away by a standard-issue prison jumpsuit. Arthur, having cooperated, received a 10-year sentence. Lucas, portrayed as a weak pawn in his parents' game, was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security prison. The Blackwood name was mud. In the aftermath, Blackwood Biotech teetered on the brink of collapse. The stock was worthless. Public trust was annihilated, and the company was facing billions in civil lawsuits from the families affected by Solevra. The federal government was preparing to dismantle it and sell its assets, but Sloane remembered her resolution in the store-all parking lot. Destruction isn't justice. She reached out, through her lawyer, to the interim board of directors, a group of terrified executives who had been brought in to manage the bankruptcy. She requested a meeting. They agreed, no doubt expecting her to demand a massive personal settlement from the dying company. She walked into the boardroom, a place that had once been her mother's professional promised land, now a chamber of corporate ghosts. She didn't look like a victim or an avenger. She wore a simple professional suit. In her bag was her mother's lab coat, carefully folded. She laid out her proposal not as a threat, but as a blueprint for survival. "Liquidating this company will put thousands of innocent people out of work, and will do nothing to help the victims of Solevera," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I am proposing a 3-part solution. First, the company will establish the Lena Moreau Victim Compensation Fund, capitalized with $400 million from the company's remaining assets and the personal assets seized from the Blackwood family. Every family who suffered a loss or injury due to the drug will be eligible. Second, the company will undergo a complete ethical overhaul. I have drafted what I call the Moreau Protocol. It mandates complete transparency in all clinical trials, creates an independent external ethics committee with veto power, and establishes the strongest whistleblower protection policy in the industry." She paused, letting the stunned board members absorb it. "Third," she said, looking at each of them in turn, "to ensure this never happens again, and to begin the process of rebuilding public trust, you need new leadership, someone who understands the science, the human cost, and the absolute necessity of integrity." "I am that person." She placed her mother's lab coat on the table. "I am offering to serve as your Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, the first in the company's history, and I will report directly to the board and the Federal Oversight Committee. My first act will be to re-release Solevera, with all its risks fully disclosed, at cost, so that the patients who genuinely benefit from it are not penalized." The silence in the room was profound. Then, one of the older board members, a man who had been with the company for 40 years, slowly began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate, respectful applause. Soon the rest of the board joined in. They didn't just accept her proposal. They embraced it as the only path to redemption. 6 months after the trial ended, Sloane Rossi walked into the executive offices of Blackwood Biotech, the same building her mother had entered as a hopeful young technician. Her office was spacious, with a floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the Philadelphia skyline. On her desk, right where Arthur Blackwood's family photos had once sat, was the photograph of Lena Moreau. On her first day, she wore her mother's old lab coat over her business suit. It was a little short in the arms, but it fit her spirit perfectly. Marcus Thorne visited that afternoon, bringing coffee and a plant for her new office. "Your mother would be so proud, kid," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just get revenge. You got redemption. For her and for this whole damn place." Sloane touched the photograph on her desk. She taught me that the truth doesn't die, Marcus. It just waits for someone brave enough to speak it. Under Sloane's leadership, Blackwood Biotech didn't just recover. It became a model. The Moreau Protocol was adopted as a benchmark across the pharmaceutical industry. The Victim Compensation Fund brought solace and closure to hundreds of families. She used her platform and a portion of her executive salary to establish the Lena Moreau Foundation, which provided scholarships and mentorship for youth who had aged out of the foster system, helping them pursue careers in science, law, and advocacy. And in her most poetic act of transformation, she spearheaded a project to convert the sprawling, empty Blackwood estate in the Hudson Valley into the Moreau Center, a retreat and treatment facility for families dealing with trauma, particularly those affected by corporate or medical malpractice. The Gilded Cage was now a place of healing. 3 years later, Sloane was giving the keynote address at a National Ethics in Medicine conference. She was no longer just a whistleblower's daughter. She was a respected industry leader. After her speech, as she was leaving the stage, she saw a familiar figure standing at the back of the auditorium. Lucas. He looked older, thinner. The easy charm was gone, replaced by a weathered humility. He had been released from prison 6 months prior. He approached her cautiously. "Sloane, your speech was incredible. You've done incredible things." "Thank you, Lucas," she said, her tone neutral. The fury was gone, replaced by a calm sense of closure. I don't expect your forgiveness," he said, his eyes downcast. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. For everything, for my part in what they did to your mother and to you. I was weak. I was wrong." Sloane studied him. The man she had loved was gone, and the man before her was a stranger shaped by consequence. "I know you are," she said. "And I hope you find a way to build a good life, Lucas. A truthful one." It was not forgiveness, but it was a release. For both of them. She walked away, back to her life, her work, her purpose. The next morning, she was back in her office at Blackwood Biotech. She put on her mother's lab coat and looked out at the city, bathed in the morning light. The pain of her past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. It had become the fuel for her purpose. Her story was no longer one of betrayal, but of resilience. It was a testament to the idea that the greatest revenge is not annihilation, but transformation. It is taking the very stones that were thrown at you to build a new foundation. It is taking the system that tried to break you and reshaping it into something that protects, heals, and empowers. The same company that had destroyed her mother was now the vehicle for her mother's vindication. And every morning, when Sloane Rossi walked into that building, she remembered the words that had become her silent mantra. Your pain has purpose. Your story has power. Never let anyone make you forget where you came from, because that is exactly where your strength lives. The truth had waited, and Sloane had been brave enough to speak it. Now she was ensuring it would never be silenced again.